Welcome. I am just totally surprised and pleased that you all came out for this wonderful program. I had 4 people call me to ask if we were going to cancel because it was too cold. I said, we've really gotten wimpy.
I was told that if we show up that we get a chance of going to Key West.
Now that is a very good idea. We'll have to try that next time.
Well, no, I heard that. It should be real.
Did John Shelton tell you that?
Yes.
He'll tell you anything to get you out, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm Joanne Abel, the Humanities Programming Coordinator, and I do want to welcome you all for coming out. We're really excited about this program. And those of you that have been here before know we do a quick commercial for the Durham Library Foundation. We're in the middle of our capital campaign, and we're way over half of the $1.5 million that we're raising to increase our programming and to make other wonderful things happen at the library. If you have any questions, ask me. And I hope you all got the new Humanities brochure in the mail. We're featuring local artists on the cover, and this is Pam George. So if you know local artists you'd like me to know about, please tell me. And we have a lot of upcoming programs after our rest over the holidays. Saturday we have filmmaker and director Rebecca Sears bringing Landscape of the Heart, the Elizabeth Spencer story. And we may have a special guest, I can't promise you, but that's going to be Saturday at 3 at the main library. Then Sunday at the South Library down near Research Triangle Park in Alston, we have farmers from the South Durham Farmers Market. And that's going to be a really fun program. And then on Monday at Southwest, we have playmakers talking about their new current production, Private Lives. And these In the Wings programs are some of our favorite ones. Well, we are very excited to have with us today Jennifer Dawn Foley, who's the author of the book, who's going to... Whoops, I'm sorry. I forgot to introduce Lynn Richardson, the North Carolina librarian, who wants to say just a little bit about the North Carolina room.
One more short commercial and then we'll get to the real stuff here. As many of you already know, the North Carolina collection is here in the main library. Its primary purpose is to preserve the history of Durham and make it available to people for their research. We've got all kinds of genealogy materials, a lot of wonderful Durham history stuff. Not just the books you expect, but photographs and maps and papers and all kinds of cool stuff. If you have papers, a lot of you've probably lived in Durham a long time, if you have things, even if you think, oh, nobody wants this is just my stuff, call me anyway if you've been active in the community or in some way, because we are collecting this kind of thing, and that's what gives the collection its real richness and depth. So I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also forgot to say that this program is co-sponsored by the Duke University Libraries. So now I will introduce Jennifer Dawn Farley, who is the author of Duke Homestead and the American Tobacco Company. She currently manages Duke Homestead State Historic Site and previously managed Stagville State Historic Site. She's worked with the North Carolina Division of State History Sites since 1998. She has degrees in history from UNC Chapel Hill and NC State. Her research has focused on the history of Durham and the Duke family. Welcome with me, Jennifer Foley.
Hello. I just have to second the, I really appreciate you all coming out tonight. I wasn't expecting this many people to brave the cold tonight, so I really do appreciate you coming out to hear this. I'm going to try and go high-tech with this too. If any of you bought books back there, you can see I'm trying to do high-tech stuff, but I'm a historian. I'm not, a techie. Like, I even have a clicker here to change slides. I don't know if that's going to work very well, but it was working really well before. Cut what on? This? Okay, that's a good start. All right. Well, anyway, so as you heard, my name is Jennifer Farley. How many of you have been to Duke Homestead before? Wow, that's awesome. Very good. And if your hand wasn't raised, I hope to see you soon. Well, I am very excited to share my new book with you all tonight. In this book, I tried to tell the story of the Dukes from the origin of tobacco farming in the area through to their philanthropy throughout the Carolinas. And by doing that, I also included a lot of local history. It's not just Duke exclusive. In fact, as I was going through the various libraries looking for pictures, I went as far as the New York Public Library and the Library of Congress to find some of these pictures. I want to say two big thank yous. One thank you is to the North Carolina collection right here at the Durham County Library. If you look through the book, you'll notice that some of the pictures are from them. I was having a hard time. Putting a book together like this is like trying to build a puzzle. And sometimes those puzzle pieces just snap together really quickly. And sometimes you just cannot find that one piece. Well, a lot of those pieces I found here. So that was a huge help. And then, of course, I want to give a big thank you to Duke University's Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library. They had a wealth of information, and they were helpful and friendly all along the way. I had a great experience with them. And as you go through the book, you'll see a lot of pictures are from Duke. All right. And if you can't hear me, I'm not sure how I'm doing with the microphone. Let me know. Okay. All right. Okay, so clicker. Let's try this thing. Uh-oh. Do I have to try to put it on again? Oh, I had turned it off. They don't teach you about this stuff when you're getting your history degree. All right. So the first, let me see if I can arrange all of this here. The first of the book's 6 chapters is called "'Twas an Accident." Reading just from that cover page. In the 1800s, farmers in central North Carolina were looking for a more profitable type of tobacco than what was currently in production. As part of this search, farmers shifted from curing leaves over pit fires in barns to heating the barns with flues and furnaces. Upon adoption of the flue system, farmers occasionally found that their newly cured leaves were a bright yellow color rather than the usual tobacco brown color. Farmers and manufacturers quickly discovered that these anomalous leaves held a sweet flavor that the conventional tobacco didn't have. The race was on to discover a reliable curing method for this bright leaf tobacco. In 1839, Stephen Slade, an enslaved blacksmith on Abisha Slade's farm, was curing tobacco over pit fires when he fell asleep and the fires began to extinguish. Upon waking and seeing the fires, Stephen ran to his blacksmith's forge, collected some charcoal, and threw it onto the dying fires. Years later, in 1886, Stephen recounted his story for the Pennsylvania Tribune, and his quote is, "To tell the truth about it, 'twas an accident. I commenced to cure it, and it commenced to get yellow. It looked so pretty." It took another 17 years for the Slades to recreate Stephen's success and have the Slade method used throughout the region. And that is the bright leaf tobacco that's still being created today. It's still being created in Durham County. And when I was creating this book, I realized that I couldn't find anywhere a book that explained tobacco farming to the layman. So I'm actually very proud of this first chapter. This is something completely from scratch, where I explained the process, much like we do on our tours. And not only am I explaining the process, but the process has changed a lot since the Civil War. So I tried to show the change over time in that process. All right, clicker again. Well, back to this, change over time. This is showing, historical farmer on the left, and then a modern farmer in his hydroponic seedbed greenhouse on the right. So that's showing that change over time. All right. Now, to create this chapter, I had to do some oral histories with local farmers, local warehousemen, auctioneers. And so I wanted to show you this picture for a number of reasons. First of all, this picture, I was able to identify everybody in it with the help of one of the people in the picture. And the person that's, I'm going to try something else with this clicker. how do I do the, oh, yeah. All right. The person who helped me is right there. That is Walker Stone
Oh, yes.
of Liberty Warehouse here in Durham. That's the second reason this is a special picture to me. So what it says in this book, and this is almost word for word what Walker told me. There were 2 rows of participants during a tobacco auction. On one row consisted of the warehouseman, the farmer, the auctioneer, and the ticket marker. So, let's see, that would be this row here. Buyers from various manufacturers were lined up across the piles of tobacco in another row. So that would be these guys. They're Liggett & Myers and American Tobacco and places like that. This photograph, taken at Liberty Warehouse in Durham in the 1950s, includes warehouseman John Stone. John Stone. No, John Stone. Sorry. John Stone in the dark outfit. See, I'm glad I wrote this down. At the head of the line, Walker S. Stone, the young man behind him leading off the sale. And S. Walker Stone in the white hat. That's Walker Stone's father. At the end of the line. Auctioneer Jimmy Morgan is standing to the left of Walker Stone. Him, I believe. The buyers in the line on the right of the tobacco are examining the quality of the leaf before making their bids. All right. So, all told, I am proud of this first chapter, and I hope you check it out. I'm not going to give the story away. All right. All right. The second chapter is entitled More Furrows in God's Earth. This is a picture of Benjamin and James Buchanan Duke on the Atlantic City Boardwalk. And I just love this picture. I think they're adorable. And they would probably hate for me to be standing here calling them adorable, but I can't. That's right. All right, so reading from this title chapter, mention of the Duke family often brings to mind thoughts of Duke University's beautiful West Campus, American Tobacco Company's factories, Duke Energy, and the family's grand houses in Durham, on Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, and elsewhere. In fact, Washington Duke's life and the lives of his children mimics the classic rags to riches story that was so popular in the 1800s. Washington Duke was the 8th of 10 children born to a farming family in Orange County, North Carolina. Orange County? Represent? Way in the back, okay. He received very little formal education, instead spending most of his childhood and early adulthood working on the farm. In a letter to John W. Wright in 1890, he wrote, "I have made more furrows in God's earth than any man 40 years old in North Carolina." The Methodist Church was also a major force in his life from a young age. His uncle, William J. Duke, was a Methodist minister, and the young Washington Duke converted to the religion at Mount Bethel Church in what is now Bahama, North Carolina. These early influences stayed with him throughout his life as his commitment to education and the Methodist Church affected his later philanthropic work. So this second chapter, I introduced the Duke family. I'm not talking about manufacturing yet or any business. I'm just introducing the characters, their home lives. And let's see. All right. So this, I'm showing these. This is the same 2 guys. This is Benjamin and James Buchanan. And if I slip, I might call James Buchanan Buck. That was his nickname. And so if you hear me saying Buck, I'm talking about James Buchanan. But that's the same 2 guys. I found these at at Duke, and this one really excited me. I've never seen that picture before. Working at Duke Homestead for 16 years, and I've never seen that picture. That was Mrs. Siemens, and it was newly released when I had gotten to the library. I want to read to you a little bit about these 2 guys. In this chapter, I'm also emphasizing the importance that Washington Duke placed on education. And in doing that, he made sure that all of his children, including his daughter, went to college. So these descriptions of the boys is going to talk about their college life. Like his sister, Benjamin Newton Duke, that would be him, was sickly as a child. However, unlike Mary, he became more robust as he grew older. After attending school in Durham with his siblings, he went to the New Garden School in 1871 and enjoyed the experience very much. In a letter to schoolmate Katie Reynolds on June 24th of 1872, he wrote, "It has just been 1 month since I parted with all my dear friends at NG, New Garden, and it seems as though it has been 3 months." Following school, Benjamin returned home to assist his father with the family's smoking tobacco company. He was the family member most involved in philanthropic work, often suggesting worthy projects to his father and brothers over the years. Now, James Duke also went to the New Garden School for college, but did not enjoy his time away. In 1872, only a few months into his term, he returned home to Durham homesick and ready to work in the factory. He enjoyed working with his father and was always looking for new merchandising ideas and ways to speed up manufacturing. As quoted by John Wilbur Jenkins in his book, James B. Duke, Master Builder, James later declared, "I have succeeded in business not because I have more natural ability than those who have not succeeded, but because I've applied myself harder and stuck to it longer. Any young man can succeed if he is willing to apply himself. Superior brains are not necessary." So, and just in those two brief descriptions, you could see how those two guys could become this unstoppable business team. Right? There's the one that has the school learning, the one that learned from Dad, the one that was looking for new ways to improve the company, and the one that's looking for ways to give back to the community. That's the two of them, and that's what we see in their history. All right, now, another thing that I did in this book you don't hear a lot about is the Duke Civil War experience. And since we are, this is kind of cool, guys, we are now officially in the 150th year since the Dukes were in the Civil War, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. This top picture is Salisbury Prison in Salisbury, North Carolina. The bottom picture is Libby Prison in Richmond. Those both play into the Duke's story. So, Salisbury Prison, Libby Prison. So, initially the Dukes were not directly affected by the Civil War. That's why in 2014 we're only now getting into the Duke's involvement with the 150th anniversary of the Duke's involvement with the Civil War. For the first Confederate Conscription Act in April of 1862 drafted men 18 to 35 years old. At 43, Washington was too old to be drafted. At 16, the oldest son, Brodie, was too young. This changed in September of 1862 when the upper limit of the draft age was changed from 35 to 45. Washington left for war in late 1863. In 1864, Brodie, then 18, went as well. At the time, Brodie weighed only 96 pounds and was deemed too thin to serve in the regular army. Instead, he was posted to serve as a prison guard at the Confederate prison in Salisbury in Rowan County, which was based out of an old cotton mill. In 1864, when Brodie was a guard at Salisbury Prison, there were between 5,000 and 10,000 prisoners housed there. Can you imagine a 96-pound, 18-year-old prison guard? I can't imagine. All right. Now, in late 1863, Washington Duke was first assigned to duty in the Confederate Navy, initially serving aboard the Confederate receiving ship, the CSS Indian Chief, in Charleston Harbor. Now, the CSS Indian Chief's claim to fame is that it was used for target practice by the Hunley. That's really all I can find about that ship. Anyway, in September of 1864, things were going south quickly for the Confederacy. Washington Duke was transferred to Richmond to man artillery batteries on the James River, basically to protect Richmond. During the Confederate evacuation of Richmond on April 1st and 2nd of 1865, Union troops captured Washington Duke. He was imprisoned at Richmond's Libby Prison, but gained parole shortly after the war ended. He was in prison for about a week or two. Basically, he was captured April 1st or 2nd. Appomattox Courthouse surrender was April 9th. He was then sent by ship to Newbern, North Carolina, and walked home from there. So that's the Duke involvement in the Civil War. In this chapter, I also enjoyed reading about the family lives of the Dukes and learning how central family remained to the Duke family. Again, when you read about the Dukes, you're usually hearing about their business endeavors and, you know, ruthless businessmen and things like that. But, you know, I also found these two things. First of all, to show you who's in these pictures, that is James Buchanan with his daughter, his only daughter, Doris Duke. That's Washington Duke with 2 grandchildren. And that's Benjamin and his wife with a grandchild. Now, Benjamin Duke had 4 grandchildren. Benjamin again, him. He had 4 grandchildren with whom he greatly enjoyed spending time. Even when their son divorced, Benjamin and his wife Sarah remained cordial with their ex-daughter-in-law, frequently visiting her and their 2 grandsons. In 1919, James wrote to Benjamin, "You are the dearest brother in the world. I cannot write or even tell you of my love and deep appreciation of what you've been to me since we were little boys together." So through everything and through the great changes from a farm in Durham to Fifth Avenue in New York City, you see this thread of family remaining central to the Dukes. All right. Long, this clicker. All right, so then chapter 3 is called "It Cannot Compete with the Bull." This is where we start getting into the business side of things. To read from this page, when Washington Duke found that he had been drafted into the Civil War in 1863, he began making provisions for his family. Brodie had also been drafted, but the 3 younger children needed caring for, so they were sent to stay with their Roney grandparents in Alamance County. It is not clear whether his farm was rented or sold, but payment was to be made in the form of leaf tobacco stored on the property. When Washington returned home at the end of the war, he found his farm barren and that the payments had not been made as agreed upon. He retook ownership of his farm, but while he had been a farmer before the war, he took the opportunity to make a fresh start. At the end of the war, while Generals Sherman and Johnston were negotiating the terms of surrender at Bennett Place, their troops looted throughout the area. Much of what the soldiers took was cured bright leaf tobacco from farmers' barns. Some even took manufactured tobacco from John Ruffin Green's factory in town. Green manufactured smoking tobacco under the brand name Best Flavored Spanish Smoking Tobacco. It's a mouthful. Around the time that former soldiers began writing to Green after the war, asking for more of his product, he changed the brand, he needed something a little catchier, to Genuine Durham Smoking Tobacco. The brand name was later changed again to Bull Durham. That's the catchy name. All right, so this is where we talk about the Duke's start in manufacturing tobacco products, what their competition was in the early days. Let's see. And what I've got pictures of here, this is Washington Duke in front of his first tobacco factory. If you've been to Duke Homestead, you have seen this little, basically it was a corn crib on the property that he started manufacturing tobacco, smoking tobacco in 1865. So today it's known as his first tobacco factory. This down here is one of their later factories as W. Duke Sons and Company, before it was the American Tobacco Company, down here. So basically he went from that to that in quite a short number of years. All right, let's see here. All right, so this is Bull Durham. The story we just heard about John Ruffin Green purchasing a tobacco factory, making best flavored Spanish smoking tobacco, which if I don't read it, I can never get those words out in the right order. That brand was especially popular with students from nearby University of North Carolina. And then, of course, he enjoyed a boost in business brought on by the soldiers' orders for smoking tobacco following the surrender. The big thing here in 1869, Green took former storekeeper William Thomas Blackwell on as a partner, W.T. Blackwell. W.T. Blackwell went on to eventually be the owner of Bull Durham Smoking Tobacco and Blackwell Tobacco Company. All right, where Green's factory? Don't press the wrong button here. Okay, there we go. Now, I fought to have this picture put in the book. It's not a very good resolution, right? It's kind of faded, and so they didn't want to put it in the book. But this is Brodie Duke, Washington's oldest surviving son's first tobacco factory in Durham. And it is because of the success of that factory, as short-term as it may have been, that caused Washington Duke decide to move into Durham from his homestead outside of town. And that is the only picture I've ever seen of that. So to me, that's a very special picture. It needed to be in the book. And somehow, I don't know how, but I won. In 1869, Brodie Duke, then 23, became the first in his family to relocate into downtown Durham to manufacture smoking tobacco. He purchased a building on Main Street to service his tobacco factory, manufacturing smoking tobacco on the ground floor and living upstairs. Although Brodie later had a problem with alcoholism, in an article on April 16, 1900, the Durham Recorder reported that at this point in life, Brodie abstained. Quote, his only beverage was branch water. In this factory, Brodie manufactured smoking tobacco under the brands of Semper Idem and Duke of Durham. He built his factory the same year that Washington Duke built his third factory on the farm. So again, if you've been to Duke Homestead, tours take you inside of Washington Duke's third factory. Washington kept an eye on Brodie's business, though, with the thought of eventually moving his own business into town. Okay. Let's see. Okay, yeah. And then the bottom picture is Washington's factory in town, and that was Washington's home when he moved into town. And actually, this first downtown factory of Washington's, he split it with Brodie. So Brodie moved into half with his company, and Washington had the other half with his company. Okay. This odd picture is a very important player in the Duke story. If I can find the page on it. Let's see, here we go. This is the Bonsack machine. So far in the story, the Dukes haven't been the first, the best, the largest of anything. Nothing to make them stand out, nothing to make them multimillionaires. This is what changes that. So basically, after many years of development, the Allen and Ginter Tobacco Company put a Bonsack machine into operation in Richmond in 1881. Now, Allen and Ginter had started a contest, basically paying a cash prize to whoever could come up with a cigarette rolling machine. And there was a boy named James Bonsack who dropped out of college to enter this contest. And his dad was not pleased. But he won. Dad got a little happier. Started the Bonsack company, made the Bonsack machine. Okay, but then we had a problem. Allen and Ginter didn't use the machine. Nobody else would either, because it broke down frequently. It was like all new technology, right? It was buggy. It broke down frequently. It was expensive to operate. But what happened, in 1884, the Dukes decided to take a risk on this machine. They ordered some, and the Bonsack machine was so thrilled that somebody was going to use their machines that they sent a mechanic down, William T. O'Brien, to fix the machines every time they broke down, to work all the kinks out. Not only did O'Brien keep the machines in running order, but he also made improvements to them, and the Dukes Company became the first to send machine-rolled cigarettes to market. On November 17th of 1893, the editor of Tobacco wrote, "In the winter of 1887, the writer visited several of the 10 existing cigarette factories, but in only one, the Duke factory, was their machines running." Okay, everybody else was hand-rolling cigarettes. So if you're sending machine-rolled cigarettes to market, you can flood the market with your product, and you can lower the price. This is also when James Buchanan Duke really starts to get good at the advertising that he's always been so interested in the marketing, and their business just takes off. Which leads us to our next chapter. Okay, this picture does not represent the next chapter, but I like the picture, and I couldn't fit it in anywhere else. The chapter is called Establishing a Larger Concern, and it deals with the creation of the American Tobacco Company. This picture is members of the American Tobacco Company's Lucky Strike softball team from around the 1930s. So it kind of relates, but isn't it? I just thought that was a great picture. All right, so Chapter 4, the Dukes orchestrated the formation of the American Tobacco Company in 1890 through a merger of the 5 largest cigarette manufacturers in the country. When, during the antitrust case United States v. American Tobacco Company, attorneys asked James Duke his reasons for wanting a tobacco trust, he replied, "Well, the principal reason was to get an organization. We, W. Duke, Sons and Company, had a large business, and I had very little assistance to help conduct it. Another reason was I thought we could make more money and handle the business to better advantage by establishing a larger concern." He also added, quote, "In selling our business to the American Tobacco Company in connection with the other manufacturers, we would get a good organization of people who would be of assistance in conducting the business. And besides that, I expect to make a profit by it because you can handle to better advantage a large business than a small business." Indeed, he did create a large business. By the time of the antitrust suit, the American Tobacco Company had expanded into Great Britain, Japan, and China, and had control of approximately 150 companies. It was also one of the original members of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. As a result of the antitrust suit, the United States Supreme Court ordered the company to dissolve in May of 1911. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about the creation of the trust. By 1889, Americans smoked approximately 2.1 billion cigarettes a year. W. Duke, Sons and Company produced about 837 million of those cigarettes, with the other 4 large firms producing the remainder. On April 23, 1889, the 5 companies met in the Fifth Avenue Hotel in New York City. James Duke proposed a merger with each company allocating stock in the new trust based on their company's assets. The men finally agreed to the terms. In 1890, the American Tobacco Company was officially formed with the owners of the 5 companies, when the owners of the 5 companies sold their businesses to the American Tobacco Company. The new company registered in New Jersey on January 31st, 1890, and James B. Duke became president of the new Tobacco Trust. At its inception, this new company produced 91.7% of the cigarettes made in the United States. Also of note, the same year that that trust was created was the year that the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. So I think they sort of knew what they would be seeing down the road. All right, so what these 2 pictures are, this is the bull, the old bull. You may have driven past it getting here tonight, depending on how you come into the library. It's still there. It looks like this now, right? They did a great job with that. This is what it looked like when the Dukes, well, yeah, I guess it was the Dukes were there, when American Tobacco was there. But it's called the Old Bull because it was originally the Bull Durham factory, Blackwell's company. But what happened, in 1899, the American Tobacco Company purchased the Union Tobacco Company, a trust that had been formed by Anthony N. Brady, Thomas Fortune Ryan, William C. Whitney, and Peter A.B. Widener, among others. At the time of American Tobacco's purchase of Union Tobacco, Union's holdings included W.T. Blackwell's Durham Tobacco Company, the National Cigarette Company of New York, and controlling shares of Liggett Meyer Tobacco Company. The purchase cost American Tobacco $12.5 million, but with the purchase, the Dukes gained wealthy directors in the form of the former owners of the Union Tobacco Company. They were also able to best their old adversary. Basically, Bull Durham almost put the Dukes out of business earlier on. because they had an early foothold in the market that the Dukes hadn't had. And then the Old Bull factory became the Durham headquarters of the American Tobacco Company. And so that's what Old Bull represents today. All right, now this is another chapter that I'm extremely proud of, the one on the American Tobacco Company, because I wanted in this book to show the American Tobacco campus. I wanted to label the main buildings, and I wanted to show what each building was used for. I couldn't find it anywhere. So again, I had to go directly to the people involved. I did oral histories with retirees of the American Tobacco Company, and they were able to tell me what exactly the buildings were used for. This is another tricky one because the uses of the buildings changed over time, but this picture represents that part of the book that I'm so proud of. After this picture, I go building by building and describe. Just for fun, you know, what I wasn't able to do in the book, but I'll do it here. I have this picture in the book, the Fowler Building, and this is what it looks like today. Mellow mushroom. Let's see. Okay, now moving on to chapter 5. Yeah. All right, the last thing to go would be cotton goods. With the success of the American Tobacco Company, it became apparent to all who knew them that the Dukes were keen businessmen who knew when and how to expand their holdings. Even as American tobacco exploded in size and popularity, the Dukes made the decision to diversify their assets. They were smart. They knew that Sherman Antitrust Act was out there. Towards the end of the 1800s, cotton held economic promise for the South, and the Dukes did not hesitate to capitalize upon this with the creation of various cotton mills in North Carolina. As William Irwin, the manager of the Dukes textile enterprise, wrote in 1894, people would always wear clothing, and even if the clothing is curtailed, the last thing to go would be cotton goods and the undergarments. He had a point. Similarly, when the Dukes began looking for cheaper sources of energy for their textile mills, the solution was to seek out riverside property for the construction of hydroelectric power plants. Due to these savvy business decisions, when the Tobacco Trust was dissolved by the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1911, the Dukes experienced continued success, both with the remaining American Tobacco Company and with other profitable pursuits. And this chapter is about the other profitable pursuits. All right, let's see. So this picture is showing the Irwin Cotton Mills. And basically, what I find most interesting, what I think I'm going to talk about with the Irwin Cotton Mills, is that they were trying to think of a name for their new cotton mills, and they decided to name it after the manager of their cotton mills because if everything went south, it had his name on it, and if it went very well, it was to the manager's glory. So that's why Irwin, the manager, was the manager of Irwin Mills. Which I thought was so smart. Yeah, and you might recognize buildings, towers.
And is that a lake? You know, there's a parking lot with a
Oh.
steep
Yeah,
bank, and it looks like there's a lake.
Right here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mill Pond.
Mill Pond. All
That
right.
fence still exists around the Irwin Mill Cemetery.
Does it? See, I didn't know that. Anyway, yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay, right, so cotton mills were very successful. They went as far as to have mills, let's see. Let me find that page. Well, no. Can't find that. Yeah, they basically, they created a new mill in Harnett County. And a mill town of 2,000 people quickly formed around the fourth mill, and a name was needed. So they decided to name this new mill town Duke. But that started having problems with this new university in Durham, so they changed it to Irwin, and that's Irwin, North Carolina. Their cotton their manufacturing, textile manufacturing did very well. Okay, so I also had mentioned hydroelectric power. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. All right, this top picture, it's kind of hard to see, unfortunately. It's not a great picture, but it's another one of those, the only picture that exists. Basically, with the assistance of William A. Irwin, and after many years of research and education, the Dukes incorporated their Southern Power Company on June 22nd of 1905. Construction for their first plant began in Great Falls, South Carolina in August of 1905, and operations began in March of 1907. The Dukes were present at this cornerstone laying ceremony for the new Southern Power Company facility in Great Falls in 1905. And that's what that top picture is. That's basically the start of Duke Energy, right there in that picture. Duke Progress Energy? Duke Energy, what is it called? Duke Energy Progress? Something. Duke Progress Energy? I don't know. You all know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. This one down here, I just think is fun. This, as the Southern Power Company expanded, the Dukes looked to generate even more power. At the invitation of Thomas L. Carbide Wilson, James Duke visited the, I can't pronounce this, the Saguenay River in Upper Quebec. How do you say it? Saginaw. See, I've heard that before. I've just never seen it written. Saginaw River in Upper Quebec, Canada, in September of 1912. The powerful rapids of the Saginaw River provided to be the perfect location for a new power plant. Duke created the Quebec Development Company in 1913 with the aim of purchasing land along that river. After World War I, James Duke and Sir William Price of Montreal created the Duke Price Power Company. The cofferdam and 540,000 horsepower plant were constructed on Isle Moline in 1923 and 1924. I'm sorry if I'm completely destroying it. As you can see, this looks like Moline. I think Moline in French? I don't know. Anyway, so hydroelectric power also got very big for the Dukes. Not as well known, the Dukes got into railroads. And I like this picture as much for the doodles around the outside of it as for the picture itself. Isn't that great? In the 1890s, the Dukes became involved in railways. In 1892, George Benton Alford of Holly Springs, North Carolina, chartered the Cape Fear and Northern Railroad. Due to financial difficulties, most likely arising from the 1893 Depression, Alford was not able to complete construction. An agreement was then made between Alford and a group of Durham businessmen that included Benjamin Duke. Under the terms of this agreement, Alford was named as the first president of the railroad. Benjamin Duke was later elected president, and John C. Anger was elected to be general manager of the line. The groundbreaking was held in Holly Springs on July 27, 1898, and construction continued in the summer of 1903 until the line stretched from Dunn, North Carolina, to Durham. In 1906, the railroad's name was changed to the Durham and Southern Railway. All right. Now, this next picture, you'll probably make complete sense why I picked this one. Kind of felt like that sort of day today. I just put a nice snowy picture in there. All right. This brings us to the last chapter, chapter 6. The title is Make the World Better by Having Lived in It. And obviously this is Duke University in the snow. What's kind of interesting about this picture is you can't get that vantage point anymore. And so that makes that picture really fun and unique. The Duke family is perhaps best remembered for their philanthropic work. Aside from the American Tobacco Company, their generous donations to organizations in Durham and throughout North and South Carolina had arguably the greatest impact on the region. Over the years, the Dukes contributed to churches, schools, orphanages, and hospitals. They were also instrumental in the creation of what is now Duke University, the largest employer in the Durham area today. The family's tradition of charitable giving started with Washington Duke and is mainly due to the influences of the Methodist Church. It was in the church that Duke was taught that those with money had to use it and give it wisely and responsibly. His children diligently followed the path created by Washington Duke, continuing and expanding the family's philanthropic work. All right. That should not look familiar unless you really know this history. That's Trinity College in Trinity, North Carolina. Yeah. Trinity College was a Methodist college in Trinity, North Carolina. It was founded in 1839, but by the 1880s it was nearly bankrupt and looking to move to a more urban area. The school quickly narrowed down its search for a new location to either Raleigh or Durham. In his memoirs, Personal Recollections of Trinity College, college president John F. Crowell recounts the story of a Methodist minister who promoted the school to Washington Duke in 1890. When the minister mentioned that the school had received an offer of $35,000 to move to Raleigh, Duke replied, "Why, Durham would give that herself and add $50,000 for an endowment if they just brought the college to Durham." After meeting with Duke, Crowell went to see Julian Shakespeare Carr, a school trustee and benefactor, who agreed to donate 50 acres of land in West Durham to the college. And then this bottom picture is also fun. It's a construction of West Campus. Basically, through the book, it talks about the construction of the East Campus, was now East Campus, the Trinity in Durham. And then it goes on to talk about the endowment created by James B. Duke. And with that endowment, they began construction of West Campus. And so this represents the other end of the Duke's major involvement in the school. One was moving it to Durham, the other was doubling, more than doubling it in size, adding a medical school, all of those kind of things. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'm trying not to, but all right. Now, we know about Duke University. I mean, you hear Duke family, you think Duke University. Less well known is their involvement with orphanages, especially the children, Washington Duke's children. They always had a soft spot for orphanages, children's homes. Basically, they said that Washington Duke was married twice. Both of his wives died young and with young children, very young children. And so those children, as they grew up, said that they often felt like orphans when they were growing up. And so they always made sure to watch out for orphans. This picture right here, obviously Oxford Orphanage. One of Benjamin Duke's early philanthropic endeavors involved the Oxford Orphans Asylum in Oxford, North Carolina. The organization depended on donations from individuals, churches, and other groups for the orphanage's operations. Duke's involvement with the institution began through a donation by the Main Street Methodist Church in 1893. On behalf of the church, Duke wrote to the orphanage requesting that the funds be used to buy a Christmas tree for the orphans. At the same time as this initial gift, the asylum appointed Duke as a director of the asylum. That was smart. In early 1894, Duke sent the orphanage $100 for books for the orphans. The following year, he helped fund renovations to the boys' dormitories. Thus began a close association between Duke and the Oxford Orphans Asylum that lasted for a number of years. I've got other schools. Kittrell College is in here. Okay. Local hospitals. Also, people don't really know as much of the Duke involvement with that. This is the first Watts Hospital. And that's the first Lincoln Hospital. And basically, the Dukes were contributors to Watts Hospital. But Dr. Aaron M. Moore was a businessman, an African-American leader in Durham, and the city's first African-American physician. In 1899, he was one of the founders of the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, which is the oldest African-American life insurance company in the country today. Dr. Moore went to the hospital in Durham where African-American patients could be treated by African-American doctors and nurses. One thing to know is that Watts Hospital was segregated. It was white patients only. Because Watts Hospital had excluded African Americans outright, a facility was needed for the rest of Durham's population. Dr. Moore approached Benjamin and James Duke regarding their funding such a hospital, and they agreed. The original Lincoln Hospital was located on the corner of Cozart and East Proctor Streets and could house 50 patients. The Dukes continued to support the facility for a number of years. All right. And then, of course, the Dukes always would sponsor churches, especially anything with the Methodist Church. This picture is Duke Memorial Sunday School class around 1925. Methodist churches were always a philanthropic priority for the Dukes. The one church closest to their hearts, however, was Duke Memorial Methodist Church. The church started in 1886 as a Sunday school that met in the Duke's tobacco factory. Later that year, Main Street Methodist Episcopal Church opened its doors. The Dukes helped greatly in funding this building, and Brodie Duke donated the land the church was constructed on. The Dukes immediately became active members and trustees of the new church. In 1907, the church had outgrown its original structure and was looking to rebuild. Benjamin and James Duke gave most of the money necessary for this venture in memory of their father. In 1925, Main Street Methodist Episcopal Church changed its name to Duke Memorial Methodist Church. So that was always a favorite. All right, and then this picture didn't make it into the book, and this has got to be my favorite picture. This picture, you're going to have to trust me on this one. That guy right there, that's Washington Duke, standing on the front porch of his house. Those guys, Trinity College students. Washington Duke had just given a large donation to Trinity College, and they had a celebration in Washington Duke's front yard. And I just love that picture. It wasn't a good enough quality and resolution to make it into the book, but I show it to everybody now. In 1890, in a speech at an educational convention, Washington Duke said, in part, quote, "I have no doubt that each of you would like to be a successful man. Be industrious. Do not always be looking for an easy, soft place. And when you have made yourself industrious, you must be frugal. Establish it as a rule always to spend less than you make. And when people begin to find out that you are industrious and reliable, they will offer you positions of profit. Ever since I was 12 years old, I've been trying to make the world better by having lived in it. Let this be the rule of your lives." And that's the story. All right, do we have any questions? Way in the back?
Yeah, just a question about when did the Dukes start to diversify their moving from tobacco, textiles, and electricity? Was that as a result of the lawsuits against them, or
No.
any action, or just
They diverse.
Can you repeat the question?
When did the Dukes? I remember that. When did the Dukes begin to diversify out of tobacco manufacturing and into other enterprises? Was it after the breakup through the Sherman Antitrust Act? And no, it wasn't. It was probably because that act was created. The Antitrust Act was created the year that they were creating a trust, knowingly and purposefully, that they realized that would be a good idea to diversify. It also just seems to be the way that the Dukes operated. If they saw a way that they could save money down the road, they would go ahead and invest in it early on. To kind of put it in a silly way, there was one time the Duke Homestead staff was on a field trip to a farm, and on this farm there was a row of John Deere tractors. And a staff member pulled me over and said, if this had been the Duke's farm, they would own John Deere. And that's basically how they operated. They were very savvy businessmen, but they knew early on, that they were eventually going to be broken up. So, yes.
Did the Dukes have slaves before the war?
That's a very good question. They did at least one. We know very little about them. First, I'm going to start by saying any history that is before Washington Duke's sons kind of came of age, we have very little written record. Washington Duke only had 6 months of formal education in his life, and he just didn't leave the written records. So what we have to piece things together from advertisements and deeds and things like that. So what I can tell you with certainty is that the Dukes owned one slave named Caroline. She was purchased after Washington's second wife died. That's all we know. So now the historian's mind starts kind of clicking, and she was probably purchased to take care of the house and the children, because there was now no woman in the house to do that job. We also know that by the next year's census, she wasn't on the census. Caroline was gone. And this is by 1860. So we don't know what happened to Caroline. And there are stories all over that she ran away, that the Dukes freed her. Washington Duke was a Republican, which at that time would have been a Democrat, right? That's when it gets fun. He was not pro-Confederacy. He was not, and so you say all that and you're like, yeah, but he owned a slave. So whatever his politics were saying, he still owned that slave. But did he own her just to set her free? This is where we have zero documentation. We don't know. This is what we do know. Okay, the slave was named Caroline. We know that later on, after the Civil War, the boys, Washington Duke's sons, started to give large gifts to an African-American woman living in what is now the Hayti area of Durham, named Caroline Barnes. She was given stock in the American Tobacco Company. She was given 2 houses in the Hayti area, one to live in and one to rent out. And again, in my mind, clicking away at this, I think it's probably the same person. Caroline, if she was taken on to be the mother figure raising those children when they were young, they would see her as that mother figure. They would want to take care of her later on. And one way that they could take care of her is by letting her stand on her own 2 feet financially. And so it's very PC, and that's the best I can do. Okay, the only other thing with slavery that I can tell you is that we know because of an advertisement that during one harvest season, at least, Washington Duke leased at least 2 field slaves from another local slave owner to help work on his farm. That's all we know. We don't know if this is something that happened every year. We don't know if there was more than 2 of them, but we know that at least in that one moment in time, there were 2 of them working on the farm, and they were leased. Yes?
What was the Duke's family relationship like with Central, Duke Auditorium, and then St. Joseph's Church, Hayti, the picture of Washington Duke?
Yeah, this is another thing where the Dukes were very charitable with African American organizations in Durham, and actually throughout the Carolinas, but especially you see it in Durham with things like Central and what's now the Hayti Heritage Center, St. Joseph's, and things like that. He's actually got a stained glass window, which I think is a little kind of creepy, but I didn't say that. But it looks a mite paternalistic there, kind of staring down on you. But it can be looked at many ways. Oh, he was a friend of the African American community. That's one way. Another way was paternalism. Oh, somebody needs to take care of that, something like that. Then there's one way, and to me this makes the most sense. Washington Duke was a Republican in a Democratic area. The other Republicans would have been the newly freed slaves. These were political allies that he was helping. To me, whether there was anything else, you have to read everything else into it. That, to me, makes sense, without putting too much emotion one way or the other into it, which is always dangerous to do in history. If you don't have the words out of the person's mouth themselves why they're doing this charity, you don't want to go there, But it does make sense that they were political allies at that time. Yes.
So the bulk of the existing Duke family today is from the Benjamin Duke line, pretty much, or?
Yes. It is mostly Benjamin Duke. James Buchanan's line died with Doris. There is also, Washington Duke had a daughter, Mary, who had children, and so there is that line also. There is... There's Brodie descendants too, and I've met some Brodie's descendants. Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave him out of there. There is a fund for anybody who can prove through DNA testing that they are directly related through direct lineage from Washington Duke. And where that becomes very interesting is, you know, Oprah's magazine, O magazine. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. There was an article in there about this this young man, African American young man in Southern California, who was manager of a Staples. Okay, and he had a single parent, single mother, right? And his mother was dying. And when she was dying, she told him who his father was. And so after she died, he started trying to find his father. Couldn't find his father, but he found his grandparents. And so he went to his grandparents, and they wouldn't really talk to him until he had blood tests done. And he had blood tests done and proved that he was their direct descendant, and they told him that he was a duke, and he is now a multimillionaire. And at last I heard, he's still managing that Staples in Southern California.
Wow.
That
Did he come down through Christine, maybe?
I don't know. I don't remember the details of that.
And the Barnes, there's a lot of Barnes African-American people. It would be interesting if the genetic testing.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that ask about that, and a lot of people want to know if there was any mix between Caroline and any of the Dukes, and is that why they were being so nice? We have found zero connection, zero information, but that doesn't mean anything. Even if that were to happen, people didn't generally write it down. But for me, the way that the timelines match up, it doesn't make sense. It makes more sense if she was like mother figure to the boys. But, you know, if anybody wanted to do DNA testing, you know, they are out there, they know their DNA, so it would be really interesting.